I'm Jonathan Peters, Senior Partner with Empirical. I'll be facilitating the discussion here today. We have some very talented and experienced individuals that I'm sure are going to be able to tackle some really tough questions for us and provide some great insights. We will be recording the discussion today, and we'll send out the link so that you can either re-review it or feel free to forward it on. The format is intended to be an interactive discussion. If you would please type your questions into the Q&A section. It's a button down on the bottom of your screen, and then we can address the questions as they come in. So let's start with introductions, and we'll dive right into the discussion. Karen, do you want to kick us off, please?
Absolutely. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Karen Butz, and I am a Vice President and Partner with Empirical Consulting. I've been with Empirical for about 7 years, and I lead our HR and talent acquisition practices. And I'm really excited to be here. Thank you.
Thank you, Karen. Elijah?
Yeah, thanks so much. Really appreciate you having me here, Jonathan. I'm a managing director at a global bank and wealth manager called UBS. And I lead kind of a specialized team here that's focused on assisting middle market enterprises almost entirely. They tend to come to us in kind of one of two ways. Either they've just scaled the business to a certain degree and need help. Just as often, we kind of get an intro when they're contemplating some kind of change, which is obviously our topic today. Often an exit, could be some sort of succession. So I've been doing that for 15 years, working very intimately with business owners and family enterprises, interfacing with folks like Empirical and Tom, who you'll hear from. It's just a total pleasure to be here. Thank you.
Great. Well, thank you. Thank you for your time. Tom?
Yeah, again, thanks, Jonathan, for the invite, and thanks, everybody, for joining us. Tom Garrity, I'm the founder and managing partner with Compass Point Family Business Consulting. We're working with family businesses somewhere between 5 and 150 million in revs, generational family businesses, so we're helping them get to the next gen. A lot of growth work, so a lot of strategy, succession, leadership development, and then a lot of transition work, whether that would be the next gen successor. We're going to talk a little bit about that today. Working with folks like Elijah on some of the nuances of shareholder agreements and funding and all of those exciting parts of transitions as well. Great to be here.
Thanks, Tom. Thanks for your time as well. So let's just dive right into the discussion. I'm going to start with a question. Tom, since you have the mic, we'll just start with you. Many parents don't feel their kids are ready to take over the business. What do you say about that? What's really going on?
Well, I don't know there's one single answer. I think in a lot of cases, quite frankly, it lies on the parents. They haven't prepared their kids. And so we're going to talk about some of those things today. What does preparing the next generation look like? Loss of control is a scary aspect. I think most people on this call certainly know and are experiencing most of their net worths tied up in the business, and letting go of somebody else to take care of it, manage it, steward it, get it to the next gen, manage all the crises of businesses and family and owners. It's a lot to let go. And so I think it's primarily fear, and then it's the classic, I'm going to get to it. And that is a recipe for disaster in a lot of things, but especially in this work. It's transitions that are an event generally don't have good outcomes. Transitions that are a process, because it's quite frankly, with your kids, it starts when they're young, and that's how you start building the values, and that's how what you're going to end up transitioning. So I think that's a lot of it is fear of letting go, fear of a lot of it's in my head. How the heck are they going to pull this off? Yeah, just haven't got it prepared, haven't got the next gen prepared.
And if I could add to that, Tom, I think part of it too is wanting to protect, right? So, there's a lot that maybe the generation that's in charge right now hasn't shared with the younger generation that they're trying to protect them or shield them from. And so it's really opening up and allowing them to be involved and understand what really goes into running the business.
So,
yeah, great point.
Yeah, I think those are good points. Tom, you mentioned in an ideal world, you'd start when the kids are young. That's probably not the most common scenario. Elijah, in your experience, when is the right time?
Well, first of all, I support that concept. I think it's a very personal answer. When is the right time? But I think starting young makes a ton of sense from a kind of transparency, personal empowerment standpoint, and trust building standpoint. So I don't know that there's any one answer to that. When is the right time? It's easy for me to say the earlier the better. I do think the earlier the better. I mean, I happened to grow up in a family business, and it was not like that. My parents, particularly my dad, were, I guess I'll call it, old school. And I think old school can have a lot of merit, defined as really hard work ethic, all the things it takes to do this, what all the people on this call have done and are doing. With that said, the other side, at least in my personal case of old school, is we didn't talk a lot. And so, you know, you just heard Tom, you just heard Karen's, that may be a theme here today a little bit.
Yeah. I'd jump on that also, Elijah, and say, we find if somebody doesn't know what's next, and we call it next chapter for the owner, if everything they get personally, both financially and really their self-actualization, old Maslow's model, comes from the business, it's really hard to walk away. And so we work really hard at helping them figure out that what's the next chapter, and really the opportunities go from all this success to significance, but they need to slow down and figure out what that's going to look like. And when that process begins to happen, we start talking about successors in the development work, because it's all just really harder than all work you had in the 30 years running your business.
So Elijah, you had mentioned there, you kind of grew up in the old school. You know, that being said, a lot of owners and business leaders have years of experience, years of leadership experience and learning from hard knocks. But that, with that being said, when it is time to transition to business, how do you assess, are the kids ready? And then how do you get them ramped up quickly to be able to maybe shorten that learning curve that the owner or the founder had gained over years? And you know, so Karen, I'd start with you, because I think from an HR side, I'd like to hear, you know, your thoughts on assessment, but collectively, I'd like to hear each of the panelists address it.
Yeah, I don't think there's a one size fits all. I think it really depends on the business and the individual and the size of the business. You know, I think in terms of assessing the talent, it's really taking into consideration what have they done thus far in their career. You know, have they worked outside of the business and are coming back? Have they stayed and grown up in the business? Do they have other, you know, what is their educational background, and really what is their interest, right? I mean, there's probably, you know, certain areas of the business that they're interested more than others. And so it's really putting together that individualized plan at the time that it makes sense to figure out, you know, where that individual is going to be most successful.
Yeah, and maybe I would just add that it's also just exposure. I think it's easy, especially when kids are young, you define young as teens, 20s maybe, to just put them in a particular area of the business and not let them, so to speak, into other areas of the business. I experienced that firsthand. I mean, it's just, again, it's easy to do because they don't have a lot of skills yet. But I think if you can have an intentional kind of process laid out over time to sort of peel back a little bit more, you know, that can be effective, because I think many people when they're young, maybe even sometimes when we're older, you know, don't have confidence, don't believe in ourselves, have a level of imposter syndrome. And the antidote to that is exposure, is education, and getting a sense of, you know, ownership, if you want to use that word, even before it's ownership shares, but a sense of ownership and access. So I think that can be big.
Yeah, I think I'm a parent. I think everybody on the call, that the four of us are parents, I believe. I think one of the things that we do with good intention, but get horrible outcomes, and that is we don't allow our kids to fail. Mm. And you know, this generation that we all moan about being, you know, entitled and they don't work hard, and well, we created them. So when we jumped in and argued with the coach that they should start on the team, and we fought with the teacher about their A's, and well, of course they have a mindset of somebody's going to take care of things for me. So we have to deal with that. it's nothing wrong with the kids. So we're going to unwind some of that. And I think Karen kind of spoke to something that's a key piece of this. They have to have a voice in coming in. Do you want to be in? Like, because the worst thing you can do is shove somebody into a family business because of their last name. I think that's the other key piece is ultimately the CEO successor, but any of the key positions shouldn't be on last name. Probably going to get some favored treatment and a little extra development potentially, but you need to pick the best person always. There's a lot of seats in a company, but when we start, I find when family businesses are there for employment of all family members, that's generally not a good thing. And shoving somebody into a seat they're not qualified is also bad outcomes. So to Karen's point and Elijah's, what's the strengths? Leverage those. And are those CEO strengths, or is there some development work we could do if that's a direction they want to go, or what else might they want to be in the company? But I think, Elijah, to your point, formalizing this, it's outside experience. Karen, you mentioned that, like, that's the best thing. They need to go out and find out what it's like to have no cash for payroll on Friday. Like, what? How does that happen? Like, that really happens. And until you get your knees skinned and bruised up, there's no real, and when your name doesn't matter and you get called out and you have struggles with relationships, all that experience, and that both the personal experience and the business experience coming into a family business, I think is critical. And then it's the internal education, and there's a lot of external resources. Many MBAs, Kellogg's School of Northwestern's Kellogg School of Business has a great family business curriculum. So this is hard to do on your own as a family member for next generation, but there's a lot of resources that can help you, because the powers of love, money, and power, or those traits of a family business, they make it difficult to do this without some outside guidance and help.
So, Tom, and I'm a parent of four, so I get this. You use the word entitlement.
Yep.
How do you keep that entrepreneurial spirit alive in the next generation?
Yeah. Well, I really will go back, because I'm guessing we have a number of people on here, and maybe you're thinking generationally and you've got young kids. It really does start with that. People teaching kids how to earn money. Like, I'm 64, so of course I had a paper route. And I had all the nonsense that went with a paper route, but I learned about what it was like to have a job and to be responsible and to get chewed out because I was late and all that stuff. So learning the how to earn money, be a part of that as a young kid, and again, failure that comes with that, and learning from those and teaching them to learn from the failure, et cetera. Now, we didn't have those opportunities with our younger kids. Now we're busy, we didn't do that, or didn't learn well enough, and we sort of feel like we've got somebody of entitlement. I think back to Karen's point, it's voice, and then it's a serious conversation about this is our successor path, whatever position they're interested in, and here's what you're going to have to go through. And not everybody wants to be the CEO, nor should they. Not everybody should be in the C-suite, nor should they. So where do you want to be? What's the development plan that you're going to have to go through to be a part of that? So again, there's another yes, I'm in, or no, I'm not. And I think creating that accountability starts to remove some of, hopefully, the entitled, like, well, but my last name is yours, like I should just have this. Nope, that's not the way it works. And so I think that's some of the beginning of it. And then back to as they advance and they have opportunities, it's giving them maybe a little division or a little startup or some project where they can get a little bit of business expertise, maybe a small P&L, some people to report to or work with, or whatever that may look like. More opportunities to fail, because that's mostly what happens. And that's where all the learning is. So it's back to my point earlier. Don't steal from your kids and other next gens. It's not just your children. This opportunity to fail, because there's a lot of learning that goes on there.
And I'd like to that's great. And I just want to add something to that. Almost behind that, what we've been talking about, exposure, opportunity to fail, is very practical. Behind the practical, and Tom knows this, and I've talked to Karen about it, is values. I used to sit on the board of a museum we have here in town in Philadelphia called the National Museum of American Jewish History. And part of what we used to talk about on that board is the story of the Jewish people. And we've been pretty good at sticking around over a long period of time. And some of what we're talking about here is businesses sticking around. Families who flourish know their story. They know what their shared values are. They talk about those shared values and they communicate them, yes, early, to Tom's point, and perhaps often to the kids. They talk about it in the context of the business, but of course they talk about it in the context of the family as well. Maybe at some point in this hour we'll get to giving and philanthropy. That can be part of this. That's just one way to articulate shared values. Obviously, the business can be a great vehicle for that. Here's how we conduct ourselves in business. Here's what we, and that kind of underlying mission and premise underneath the activity and the practical nature of the business, I think is important.
I couldn't agree
So,
more.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Tom.
I was just going to say, I think that one of the biggest challenges in family business succession is that ability to maintain and transfer the values. That's on the other side, when we're talking to parents about their kids or their nephews, nieces, what are they most concerned about? Entitlement. What are they going to do when they learn how much money is here, if there is any, or what's possible? And then how I don't know how they're going to carry on our values. And Elijah, to your point, this isn't rocket science, but it's work. You start sharing stories about what your dad did and your mom did and your grandmother, and go back far enough that they came over on the boat. And those are the stories of who you are. And that is the values. What's his name? Stephen Covey did a video a while ago long time ago called Whitewater. And it was this video of these guys in a raft going down a whitewater river. And it's just crazy, right? It's just churning and water's everywhere. And he equates it to like, oh, that's life. Like, it's just a chaotic mess. And in that mess, how do people navigate their way? And they navigate their way between, we're in constant change, and we've got values to lean on, and we have choice. Those are the three constants: change, values, and choice. And those values give us the mechanism to, like, how would I make those choices when I run up against these problems? Because if you're in the back of the boat and the other guy's in the front, he can't hear you. You're just counting on people to know what the hell to do. Well, how do they know what to do? You're sharing your stories, your family stories. That's how those values are transferred and become integrated into the next generation of leadership.
Good. That's a very good point, Sarah. Elijah, you've been involved in working with families that are contemplating executing on a transaction. How do these family matters we've been discussing intersect with that type of an event?
Well, they definitely intersect with it because they're part of the family business already. And I would describe the even potential for a transaction, which of course can take many forms. It could be a minority transaction without a change of control, maybe just a recap of some kind. It could be a full exit. It could be obviously of ESOPs, other kinds of structures. So that can mean a lot of things, but anything that involves some sort of large moment for the business is a massive event and a big potential curveball and can be incredibly disruptive. There's just no other way around it. I mean, I've been doing transactions for 15 years, been involved in probably 10 a year, 5 or 6 that actually close, and it's a really difficult undertaking. I would not want to whitewash that at all. It's probably one of the most intensive, stressful undertakings I've seen, because someone or a leadership team is working now 2 jobs. Add in family into that. And by 2 jobs, by the way, I'm just talking about running the business to make sure, that keeps going, and then also running a potential transaction process. Now layer in family. Okay. And so there's maybe multiple family members involved in the business, et cetera. There's 2 sides of this. It can be incredibly challenging. It also can be a huge boon. I don't want to, act like everything I've seen has been bad. I mean, I was actually just out to dinner last week with a very successful family business owner in New Jersey, and his wife was with him, and he actually said, the best thing I've ever done is bring my wife into the business, right? And so we have all kind of worries about this kind of thing, but his wife was, once she kind of got done raising the kids, she was looking for what to do. She came in and she's just helped actually metastasize the business in a very positive way. So, and now they're contemplating an exit. So it doesn't have to be all bad, but it adds a big layer of complication. And then, of course, talk about how to address that.
So the complexity that you're speaking to, I would imagine, takes literally a tribe of resources to put together a successful transaction. And I would think that you're probably playing quarterback in that scenario. Is that correct?
I appreciate that. I do sometimes, if I'm lucky. The resources that I have seen tend to be, the right legal, the right accounting, some sort of transaction advisor, which is not us. It's someone to lead that transaction. There's very often, specifically if it's kind of middle market or even a little bit bigger business, some kind of consultant involved. It might be an Empirical if it's more from kind of the management consulting side, or it might be a Tom Garrity from kind of the family dynamics and governance side. Having those right butts and right seats. I think there's someone on this call today who's a client of mine who knows I created a slide around it and I changed it from Butz because that wasn't all that professional. So it was just right people in right seats. I think we all get it. That can be such a huge difference maker. It's not to get overly burdened with, lawyers and consultants and everything. Just have the right one. Just one of them, and make sure they've really, really done this a lot of times. And same thing with the other butts and the other seats. And then, get them coordinated. Coordination, collaboration, communication between those different trusted advisors with the business owner, ultimately with their hands on the wheel, making the decisions. That can decrease the pain. You're not going to eliminate it.
You're dead on. Piggyback on to, we can't underestimate the power of the family business system. Every family business has no choice. It's in a system. And the system consists of 3 domains: the business, the family, and ownership. And those 3 domains intersect with one another. So can't go like, well, I'm just not going to pay attention to that because that will come home to roost at some point. And Elijah, those deals you're talking about, and whether it's an outside deal, a PE deal, or a strategic, or it's an internal, an ESOP, or the next generation of transition, if you haven't addressed the ownership circle and their desires and what they want to see out of this family business and their desires around liquidity and growth and control and got some alignment there, that's going to be a problem. And if you haven't worked with the family to talk about what's our plan as a family for this family business, it's not just the people that work in the business that influence the system. The whole family influences the system. So as it moves out further, maybe they're not so directly, but I always laugh when we start working with somebody and I'll say, so does your spouse work in the business? Nope. So what kind of impact do they have? Oh, they don't have any. And I go, oh, so they don't sleep on the pillow at night groaning about why you're working so hard and why your brother's a knucklehead. And of course they do. Of course they impact the system, and you've got to address that. And of course you got the whole business, which is a huge challenge. So you've got to invest time in all 3 of those domains. That's how you successfully get them to the next generation of ownership and leadership, whether it's family or it's a third party or a PE deal that gets done, or an ESOP, to Elijah's point. But they all have to be addressed, and they all need leadership. That's another big challenge as you move these things generationally.
So that being said, when you think about the softer side of whether it's a transaction or transition, you have these personal dynamics that come into play, right? And that's probably the highest degree of complexity, I would imagine. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, wow. It's all over the map. Family dynamics are tricky. When it's kind of like trust. It's hard to define, but when you got it, you know it's there. And when it's gone, you also know it's there. When it's working well with the family, you can't quite put it all together. Why? But when it's not, it's a freaking mess and you don't know where to go. And so what's a simple business decision is complicated because of the family relationship. And you throw some ownership on top of that. So now we got a little power and control component of it. It's just extremely challenging. So how do you manage through that? Elijah alluded to it earlier. You build some governance structure. And none of this is perfect. I don't mean to be Pollyanna, but you can really do things that can help you run your business and your family and your ownership group and give them input into this entire family business system to be way more successful. And yeah, for us, it's all about the next generation of leadership and ownership, but they're really fun to run when it's working now. So it's not like, oh, I'll do this someday. So investing in building a board for your business, and for the ownership group to have somebody that's watching over, to invest in a family council that includes the voices of the family, and depends on where it is generationally and how close the family, but maybe that council gets involved in some of the next gen development. And of course, it's governance in the business itself, and building out a good executive team that can execute what the owners are looking for. So all of that needs time and investment. And when it's done well, these things are extraordinary resources of wealth. Of course, fulfillment. Why do we do this? Because these family businesses are hallmarks in their communities. They provide jobs, good jobs. They're there generation after generation. They create wealth. They support the Little League. Yeah, well, why wouldn't we want that to continue? But you got to invest in it to make it continue.
So, Tom, you and Elijah both used the word governance. And, as I think through that, governance, I feel like it's very black and white. You're putting guardrails around things. At the same time, we're talking about families here, and we're talking about multi-generations in many cases. So I'd like to hear from the panelists in terms of how do you think about that fine balance between governance, which is necessary, and balancing it with the family.
Did you want to start, Karen, or?
Go ahead. Yeah, I was going to say.
No? Okay. Tom, you can go, or I can step up either way.
Well, I will say a couple of things real quick. Let's just take one piece of governance that we do quite often with families, and that is building out a family constitution or a family charter. It's not legally binding, but it's a document that articulates the goals and vision and agreements, which means they have to communicate, and they have to have the hard conversations of how they're going to behave and conduct business, and principles of action, and where they want to see this business go. So, and we ask the hard questions that, quite frankly, every time we do this, they go, God, we always wanted to have that conversation, but nobody had the guts to ask the question. So it's things like, does everybody get in because of your last name, or do you actually have to be competent? So that's a great conversation to have. Is family always going to be in leadership, or are we going to pick the best possible candidate to lead our family business? Will ownership always be? How do you get into ownership? Who gets into ownership? What if you want to get out of ownership? Do spouses get to come in? All of these important questions to do when you're not under stress and chaos, so you can where you can really use good thinking. And it's not a single meeting, of course, but over a period of time, you end up with this document, compensation, all those sticky wickets that create all sorts of problems later because you haven't addressed it, is incredibly powerful. What are our values? Why are we in this? Why are we in this kind of family business? When families come around that, and Elijah, to your point earlier, they start telling stories about how they got into this, and it goes back several generations, something about the ancestors. It's for the kids that want to be a part of that and continue the legacy of the business. It's incredibly empowering. And back to the values piece you talked about, Elijah, it's like, God, I love that. I'm holding on to that. I want to continue that. So that's one of the governance tools that we use, and it gives tremendous direction. And I'll say about boundaries, to your point, Jonathan, all they are is limits that create clarity. They're just limits that create clarity. If we don't have them, like, everything's open. So we create some limits that create clarity. And they might have to change in the future because business changes and families change and ownership structures change. But having some of that governance really is helpful.
Maybe I'll just tie what we're talking about into, I did happen to see a couple chat questions come up. So, I saw one of them, having worked with multi-generational family businesses, what are some of the key challenges? And then managing through family relationships, like 4 generations. I see the question coming up, how do you do that? And all of us on this call who have worked in this for a long time know that is very unlikely. It happens. There may be even people on this call who have done it, but know you're among the very, very few. 2nd generation, unlikely. 3rd generation, dramatically unlikely. 4th generation, ridiculous, go on from there. I know a guy who's in a 6th-generation business. That was a first for me. Maybe Tom or Karen have seen more, but the point is that I think getting through that and flourishing through that has to do with some of what we talked about around values, some of what we talked about exposure. And then also, I think, tying back to what Tom said about the way that we as parents relate to our kids. Yes, I'm a parent as well. Some of the things that we've put out in our research at UBS, and we have a just proliferation of research on this topic, is families that succeed support kind of the separation and individuation of the kids, whether that means within the business or outside the business, but that they can define themselves, and giving them that kind of latitude. The culture of the family or the family business focuses on the strengths, what everybody's strengths are. That's just a different way of articulating what Tom said, which is, where do you fit? And then this one I love, parents who view themselves as teachers and learners. Because kids can be young, they're by definition a lot younger. But what can they teach us, and how can that have some reciprocal value as we scale the business or as we contemplate a potential succession or a potential change? These kind of changes have implications almost for the identity of the family because they're so enmeshed. It has implications for almost like the heritage of the family. The business can kind of be what holds the family together in some ways. So one thing I would just say in advance of any kind of big change, maybe consider what the options are first. I mean, I'm in M&A, so I love seeing business sales happen, but how about exploring first if that's not the right avenue? Can certain family members step up? Could we bring in professional leadership that could partner with the family members, and the family members go into other sorts of roles? And by kind of diligently exploring these different paths, that can ultimately make the right path, more clear.
So we've been talking quite a bit here about assessing the successor. When are they ready? All of that. What if there's a scenario where, and I'm sure there are, and I think I'm familiar with one or two of myself, where the next generation has zero interest in the business. They just, whether it's not their maybe a field that they want to pursue, or it just, there is no logical successor. What now?
Karen, do you want to go ahead?
Yeah, I was gonna say, I think the most important answer to that question is you can't force them. If there is absolutely no interest in running the business, then making them run the business is going to be the worst decision you can make. So I think you need to, again, look at it individually. Is it they don't want to do it right now, in which case then you put sort of a bridge plan in place? Or is it 100%, I never want to have anything to do with this business? Then you have a decision point to make. Do you bring in someone from the outside? Do you do some sort of transaction and exit the business? And what is the right timing for that? But absolutely would not force anyone into the business that doesn't want to.
Yeah, I'd agree. We're working with a 5th-generation family business, a little bit of quasi. It had 3 generations of a family. The next family wasn't related, but they were very close. So they called themselves a 5th gen. And he was convinced that one of his 3 daughters was going to take over. And as this sounds ridiculous, but it was a question as simple as this. So have you talked to them? Well, no, and I'm sure they are. Anybody on this call knows, they all said no, they had no interest. And so here's something I hope everybody hears. I think your primary job as a CEO in any of these privately held, and again, we're talking specifically to family businesses, but any privately held business, and quite frankly, a public the same way. You've got to build a leadership team that can run this thing without you. Because when you have that business is transferable, and you have every option in front of you. You could be an ESOP, because an ESOP is going to require a management team. Time to start building one isn't when you decide you want to do an ESOP. It's too late. Half of your value is going to be tied up with a strategic or PE looking at, like, they're not buying the company, the ideas, the assets. They're buying who's there, who's going to continue this. And God forbid one of the 5 Ds hits you, death or divorce or disability or distress, the whole economy goes in the tank, or a disagreement among shareholders. So building a company that can run without you. Now you have options. If the kids aren't interested, or any family, You have a lot of options. You could do anything we've talked about in terms of a transition and transaction, but you also could have that leadership team continue to run the business. Maybe the next generation might have interest. Maybe you become a mindset from being a family business that has this business to a family who's in business. It's almost a family office sort of scenario where you step back and you've got this operating entity that's ideally spinning off cash and being profitable for the shareholders. You can only do that is if you build a company that can run without you. So that's key. And then everything Karen said, God, the worst thing you can do is shove somebody in there. It'll fail. It just will fail. They'll show up that way. The leadership team will feel it. What will A players in that company do? They'll bail as fast as they can because they're not dumb. They can see the writing on the wall. So,
yeah, and maybe I can just add, we talked about getting educated, but I want to get even more specific about it. And in this case, we're talking about maybe educating the next generation. Here, I'll talk about educating the management generation, whether that's G1 or whoever's kind of the senior generation. You have an opportunity to get educated. I have found doing this a long time that really good investment bankers can be an incredible resource with a cost benefit calculation in terms of just meeting with them, which is undeniable, meaning they'll meet with you for free, have a confidential conversation. And the good ones aren't just trying to push you to sell the business so they can collect a fee. The good ones are really seeking to understand. And so they'll sit with you, they'll spend the time, understand your business. Remember, we're still on this topic of, I don't have another generation who's interested, like the daughters in the business that Tom referred to. So investment bankers can be really, really adept and great as a resource, at least the ones who are consultative and are willing to do it, in terms of spending some time educating about your sector, what's going on in your sector, what they've seen 10 or 100 other businesses do that are in your sector and why they worked and why that path didn't work, and what those myriad of options are, and what the trade-offs inherent in those options are, and you can get all that for free. So the only time it becomes not for free is if you really start a process and go down one of those paths, but you don't have to. You have optionality, and you can come out of some of those conversations armed with hopefully more clarity, because you'll know, okay, that's totally not for me, or this is.
So we've been fielding a lot of questions that have been typed in as well. And I just encourage anyone who has any other questions to certainly raise those for the panel to address. What have we not discussed here in the collective experience of the panelists that should be brought to the table? It should be front of mind.
Yeah, I'd like to add, Jonathan, that although I know family businesses have their own unique set of challenges, a lot of what we've talked about today are challenges that all businesses have, right? I mean, succession planning and figuring out, how we're going to get, those younger generations and those college graduates to succeed throughout the organization is something that all businesses are struggling with, including the working with the multi-generations in the workplace at one time. And we are just at an unprecedented time in history when we do have about 4 generations working all together. So, there are a lot of resources out there over and above, again, family business resources, because we're all sort of in the same boat. We're all trying to figure out these same challenges and these same struggles. And I would be remiss if I didn't mention that coaches are huge. They're huge throughout all of business, whether it's an individual executive coach or whether you have a coach for your leadership team, really try to find those resources and find that right fit for people that can be a trusted advisor for you.
Yeah, and maybe I'll add that there's obviously great potential for conflict, right? We have conflict with the people we work with. If we're in a family business, of course, we're going to have conflict with the people we work with. It could be over compensation of family members, just like in any business. It could be parent-child or sibling-sibling. There could be owners in the business who aren't family members, as well as owners in the business who are family members. And then you have spouses. I mean, I personally have never had a disagreement with my wife, but for those of you that have, there can be spouses. And then, by the way, spouses who marry into the business, so you're adding many layers here, and you have the potential for conflict. I mean, the work that Tom's company does is basically help provide a highly expert, kind of neutral, arbiter, trusted, confidential arbiter to come in and try and preside over some of those things. That can be a really consequential decision to, say, we're going to be proactive. We're not going to allow this to fester and to become something that could have an incredible cost, both quantitative and qualitative. I mean, let's not lose money. Let's definitely not lose family. Okay. And so there really are resources for this kind of thing, starting, with folks like them. Maybe I'll just add on that real quick, if you don't mind, because I just saw one of the questions pop up about selling the business. So it's a little bit in my world of M&A, selling the business to the management team, non-family. How do you structure it so that the business perseveres, stays local, keeps contributing to the community, as Tom pointed out? How do you change hands that way, where it's not necessarily just like an overnight process, like I'm going to go sell to a private equity acquirer or something? A lot of different ways to do that. Sorry, but I'll plug investment bankers again. By the way, that's not what I do, but I'm just saying they can help illustrate and model, what some of those options could be, even if it is passing it to employees, whether they get some debt financing for that, and the best way to do that, what kind of glide path to do that on. And we've made reference now a couple of times to ESOP, so certainly some of the crowd will know what employee stock ownership plans are, not option plans, but stock ownership plans are. So, very specialized, unique way of monetizing your equity in the business. Just like everything else in M&A, there's all kinds of hearsay out there about what it is, what it means, why it's horrible, because my friend down the street or at the golf club did it and ended up backfiring. The truth is, I wouldn't listen to the hearsay. I would get educated about it, about whether it's a fit for your business or not. An ESOP, look, there's, I think, 5,000 of them that happen each year in the United States. So they work for some people. And I know some ESOP owners that have just done incredibly well with it. And again, I mean both quantitatively and qualitatively, and they've made their employees millionaires along the way over time. And so there are companies that specialize in that. So to the point of selling to employees, through me, through Empirical, through a Tom, you can find specialists on something like an ESOP. And again, for the huge price of free, you can have some thoughtful consultations with them. And then ultimately they could, potentially you can engage them in doing a feasibility study or that kind of thing.
Yeah, great points. Jonathan, I'll go back to you. Somebody had asked about fourth generation. I can't remember the exact question, Elijah, that you had brought up, but something that how do we communicate, or how do we work better together? I can't say specifically to you, of course. I don't know your particular business, but I've got a couple fourth gens in the portfolio. To Elijah's point, you're in rare air. 1 or 2% maybe make it to fourth. So here's one of the challenges in a family business. And what's happened to his generation, I'm 64, so I was born in 1960. So I'm coming out of, emerging World War II, the whole middle class is growing and evolving. And, my parents, they were the first ones to have a home outside of a family farm on their own, per se. So, and then we went to college, like that didn't happen, all those kinds of stories. And family lived next to each other. So the uncle was across town and my grandparents were in town and my aunt was, we were together. We made decisions together. We fought together. We knew each other. We knew my cousins. We all kind of knew one another. As I grew up, everybody started, going to school, moving out. And now look at us today. I've got 4 kids. I've got one in Massachusetts, one down in the Philly area, one down in Delaware, one out in Colorado. Our ability to be together and make decisions together, to work together, to solve problems together, we have to be really intentional about doing that. And that's the magic of family and a successful generation family business. So when you got 4 generations, to Elijah's point, you got wives and crazy stuff and politics and everything's in the mix. How are you going to manage that? How do you build some continuity and some connectivity? You've got to be purposeful. So one thing that stands out real quickly is multiple shareholders, probably in 4th generation. if you don't have a board, a really good functional board with outside professionals, non-family outside professionals, that really can provide objectivity, experience, connections, advice, counsel, represented by the shareholders and representing the shareholders, that's a great way to start getting some more involvement. The shareholders need to have a voice. When you stop listening to them, or you don't give them options of how to get out if they want to get out, or what's possible, or where are we going, that's the stuff that tears these family businesses down. It's not the subsequent generations are dumb. It's that haven't designed some of the structure to manage the complexity as these things move out generationally. So I'd encourage that.
So,
go ahead, Jonathan. Sorry.
Go ahead, Elijah. Why don't you finish your comment, and then I'm just going to bring us home here as we're getting close.
No, I just saw a really cool question pop up. Maybe we'll just make it brief. Maybe Tom or Karen will have thoughts on it. But how do you generate a feeling of achievement when the next generation has had no part in starting the business? I think that's an amazing question. And I would circle back to what Tom said. I really think it's about, if it is the founding generation or the prior generation, I think a lot of it is up to them. And what is the nature of their leadership? What is their relationship with their own control or need for control? And how willing are they to, mentor and support that kind of separation and individuation that I was referring to? I think Karen made a really smart comment at the top of this where she said, have these kids done something before? Paraphrasing what you said, but I mean, have they done something before in their lives? I've seen some really thoughtful business owners who have basically said, no, when you get out at age 21, 22, if you went to college, that's not when you start here. Maybe it'll be in the same industry, but that's when you kind of go off and make hay and get some experience and get some bumps and bruises. Then maybe when they start at age 26 or 29 or 31, there's somebody with a little bit more of a developed sense of self. And now they still have to develop that within the context of the business. And if they can do that, I think they should have pride, even if they didn't found the business. I mean, that should generate within them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think the flip side of what Tom was saying about if you have the ability to give them a small chunk of business to run on their own, in addition to giving them a safer place to fail, you're also giving them a place to shine, and you're giving them a place to show that, they can accomplish within the business, and it really builds up their confidence and helps with that potential imposter syndrome of, well, I'm only here because I have this certain last name. No, you're here because you have successfully run a piece of this business or a department or a product line or whatever it may be.
Yeah, great point. And I think playing on both of you, help them see the value of being a strong family. They're a part of that. Strong families build successful, strong family businesses, or they're certainly a big component of it. Don't underestimate the power of that. And then to Karen's point, the opportunity, these things need to keep growing. Next generation, they can't sit on their hands and go, I'm just gonna, that's shirt sleeves to shirt sleeves kind of stuff, right? You just run the business in the ground. Like, there's more mouths to feed. There's the exiting shareholders we got to take care of. There's all the complexities of business. Like, we have got to keep growing that. Jonathan, you alluded to it earlier, the entrepreneurial spirit, the innovation. Give them something. We had a big family farm going to 4th generation, and they sell, it's a commodity business. So everything's sold, mercantile exchange in Chicago and directly to some of the mills and et cetera, and big cattle and hog operation. They decided they wanted to go into retail. So they gave it to a 4th generation as a project. Completely different business, of course, right? They're in a commodity business, and now they're going to go into the retail business, a completely different customer value proposition. They didn't know crap about that business. They gave it to some of the next gens, and they bumped and had all sorts of issues, but they've had moderate success, and the pride that comes from, we didn't know anything, and now we got something. And whether that's part of the next, innovation that group does or not, to be seen, but they've gotten a taste of that entrepreneurialism that company is going to need to continue to be successful going forward. And now you got a sense of pride in being a part of it. And quite frankly, a few of them washed out, said, I'm not up for this. And that's okay too. That's back to the voice. Like, I'm not wired this way. I want something else. And that giving those kind of opportunities helps create those moments where they can have those kinds of decisions.
Well, I'd like to just thank all 3 panelists for your time here today. Great conversation. Thank you for the participants for joining us. Look for the link and feel free to forward that on. And we'll look forward to having you join a future panel discussion as well. Thank you.